those that are spreading lies and misinformation. We're not interested in victims.
Elon Musk has recently launched a series of pointed attacks against British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, accusing him of being a national embarrassment. Musk has demanded Starmer's resignation. This public confrontation on the social media platform X, which is owned by Musk, has its roots in the controversial issue of grooming gangs in the UK. These child rape cases go back to a time during Starmer's tenure as the Director of Public Prosecutions of the DPP from 2008 to 2013. Musk's allegations center on his view that Starmer failed to adequately address the issue of child sexual exploitation during his time as the head of prosecution in Britain. Musk specifically accuses Starmer of allowing rape gangs, particularly those involving Pakistani British Muslim men, to operate without facing justice. Musk claims that Starmer's leadership contributed to systemic failures that enabled these gangs to exploit vulnerable girls over the years. In his various posts on X, the social media platform which has become a megaphone for Musk's voice to be heard around the world, he has called for a national public inquiry into these grooming gangs cases. He has criticized the Labour government for what he calls its alleged complicity in these crimes. Musk's rhetoric has escalated at a time when he suggested that Starmer should face charges for his complicity in what he described as the worst mass crime in British history. He's also targeted Jess Phillips, who is the safeguarding minister, accusing her of covering up for Starmer by rejecting calls for a public inquiry. The grooming gang scandal refers to a series of high-profile cases in the UK. This predominantly involved British Pakistani men who were found to be involved in systemic sexual exploitation of young girls. These cases gained significant media attention and public outrage because of the apparent failure of law enforcement and child protection agencies. Reports indicated that officials often hesitated to act because of fear of appearing to be racist, and that led to widespread criticism and calls for accountability. The issue gained significant media attention after reports emerged from towns like Rotherham and Rochdale, revealing that local authorities there had failed to act on numerous reports of child sexual abuse because of fear of being politically incorrect, and also of fears of being labelled racist. The scandal led to public outrage and calls for accountability both amongst law enforcement and in the social services. Starmer's role as the head of prosecution at that time was scrutinized, although he was the one who introduced new guidelines in 2013 aimed at improving responses to child sexual exploitation. Critics argue that more decisive action was required during his tenure. The failure to prosecute many offenders has led to ongoing debates about justice for the victims and accountability of those who were in positions of power. Musk has even gone so far as to appeal directly to the monarch, King Charles III, suggesting that the king should dissolve parliament and call for new elections. However, such an action would be unprecedented in Britain. It could lead to a constitutional crisis in the UK. There is no provision for the king to fire a prime minister unless the prime minister has lost the confidence of parliament. The monarch traditionally remains politically neutral and does not interfere with parliamentary matters, which is what Musk wants him to do. Despite Elon Musk's repeated attacks, Keir Starmer remains the undisputed leader of the Labour Party. He enjoys substantial support within his party and in Parliament. Following a landslide victory in July of 2024, Starmer's leadership has been bolstered by a massive majority in Parliament. In fact, the Labour Party under Starmer won its biggest election majority with over 400 members of Parliament in the last 25 years. The last time a Labour Prime Minister had more than 400 MPs in the British Parliament was in 1997 when Tony Blair led New Labour to end years of Conservative and, in specific, Margaret Thatcher rule. But within just a few months of that historic electoral landslide by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, there is growing criticism from various factions of the party. The Labour Party views Musk's criticisms as politically motivated, suggesting that they stem from frustration over recent government actions against those individuals who spread rumours related to riots that happened in Southport last year. This context adds another layer to Musk's engagement with UK politics. He appears to be targeting Starmer not just for past actions, but also as part of a broader critique of how Starmer's government has been handling free speech issues. Over 30 far-right activists, including the right-wing provocateur Tommy Robinson, was arrested by the British police for fanning misinformation which led to riots in southern England last year. But why then is Musk targeting Starmer, and that too for a controversy from well over a decade ago? Starmer responded to the controversy. He did not directly refer to Musk by name, but he said it was a travesty that some British politicians, referring to opposition Conservative politicians, who he said were jumping onto this bandwagon on some conspiracy theory being floated by the far right. He lamented how the Conservatives, despite being in power for 14 years, did nothing to investigate these unsubstantiated claims.
Those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote.
But in 2012, when Starmer was the head of the DPP, he had publicly admitted that a generation of vulnerable girls had been let down by the criminal justice system. He acknowledged that perpetrators had escaped justice for decades because of systemic failures, including within the Crown Prosecution Service. One notable case involved the CPS dropping charges against a rape gang despite substantial evidence against them. In 2009, one victim had provided DNA evidence which linked her attackers directly to the crime, but the CPS concluded that she would not be deemed a credible witness, and as a result, the case had to be abandoned. That decision contributed to wider investigation into so-called grooming gangs, allowing the abuse to continue unchecked. And it was not until 2012 when significant prosecutions occurred and when 9 men were ultimately convicted for grooming gang offences, largely in Rochdale. These men were found guilty of exploiting young girls, some of them as young as 13, by providing them with alcohol and drugs and eventually facilitating sexual abuse. There was one whistleblower, Maggie Oliver, who exposed police failings in these investigations. Starmer has said that Maggie Oliver is perhaps as guilty as anyone regarding the lack of accountability and change in handling the grooming gang cases. While Starmer did implement reforms that were aimed at improving how child sexual exploitation cases were handled and reported during his time as DPP, critics against him argue that these changes came too late and they did not adequately address the immediate needs of the victims. And now it has been left to the richest man in the world to open this Pandora's box yet again. But whether or not that will actually cost Starmer his job, despite this overwhelming and some would say historic mandate that he received just a few months ago from the British people, that is going to be a question of intrigue in British politics, perhaps through much of 2025.